Many of us don't think too much about the foster care system. And, frankly, when we do, perhaps we think about those wonderful people who are actually willing to take foster kids into their homes, or maybe we think in kind of an unfortunate way about the kids who are stuck in that system, go through that system, and how sad that is. Maybe we think structurally and are like, that probably isn't a very good system. And we're going to find out in our conversation today, you're right. It's not a great system. Um, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how we fix it. And it's really complicated. It's a complicated process. It's a convoluted and imperfect system, one that sometimes, maybe too often, actually leaves the children it is meant to help in a worse position than they might otherwise be, or certainly not better off. But foster kids everywhere are very fortunate that one woman has set on a crusade to begin to repair this system, and that is Darcy Olsen. Darcy is the founder and CEO of the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. It's a name you may know if you've followed state policy and policy in general from her time at Cato and then a long tenure leading the Goldwater Institute out in Arizona, where she really led things like right to try and other really important legislations, education savings accounts that have swept the nation, but also has this personal story too to why she would get into this. We're going to get into that in a second, and the work that the Center for Rights for Abused Children has done in legal representation, changing laws, affecting the public policy landscape around this inadequate foster care system in just a few short years has been remarkable. We actually talked to Darcy back in episode 4 of Giving Ventures. Here it is, episode 108. A lot has changed, including the name of the organization, which then was called Generation Justice. Uh, Darcy, I'm thrilled to talk to you today. So good to see you.
Oh, Peter, it's wonderful to be here. I can't believe episode 4 to episode 108. This is
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, and let's talk about all the things that have changed and all the things you've done. But actually, I want to go back to the beginning of your story in this. We laid this out. You're kind of a policy wonk. This is frankly not a world that when I met you, I would have necessarily expected you in. But this work is personal to you. So talk to us about baby Ophelia.
So, Peter, while I was running the Goldwater Institute, I one day was praying and I felt inspired to become a foster parent. And there's really no other way to put it other than that. It came through prayer. And I thought I would help a teenager. I was single and I was working, all the time, kind of a workaholic. I thought most of these kids were basically juvenile delinquents. And it turns out that most people think that. But what I found out is that's actually not what the system is all about. So I went in ready to foster a teenager, and they said, your loft doesn't meet the right regulations. But if you could take a baby and put a baby at the foot of your bed, we'd be so grateful. And I said, what, a baby? But I'm single. And I thought people wanted babies. I was so confused. And the woman said, we have so many infants coming into foster care right now that they are sleeping in government office buildings and in shelters downtown. And she said, again, if you could open a crib, we would be so grateful. And Peter, I don't know how that makes you feel when you think about a newborn without a mother or anyone to pick them up and love them and hold them and comfort them. But it broke my heart, and so I said, "Yeah, I'll get a crib and I'll figure this out." And so I did, and I took in my first baby as a newborn, and like so many others in the system, the vast majority of children coming into the system are in there because of drug exposure. Really terrible neglect and abusive situations. And all I knew about her at the time was that she had spent the first 2 weeks of her life on a morphine drip. That's the only thing that I knew. There was a lot of prayer that she would be healthy, that her mom would know she was safe. I was worried about this woman. Where was she? And I couldn't reach her. And of course, I was praying that I could do this by myself. And that was the beginning of a very long journey. And she went up for adoption, and I did what any mother would do, and I kept her. And I went on to foster 9 more children and adopted 4 of the 10. And that was the seed for the Center for the Rights of Abused Children, because although I was doing that as a mother with a mother's love, I was in the courtroom for these children with my nerdy constitutional rights background, and it was devastating to see the lack of rights that these children have, and to understand that if we could just get after some of those rights, we could completely turn around the consequences and the outcomes for children who are abandoned and abused. And so that's why I'm here with you.
So, as we've kind of alluded to several times here, a lot of people don't really understand the foster care system. They don't think about it much. Again, if they do, maybe they're saying those parents, people like you, Darcy, or God bless them, couldn't do it without them. And frankly, it's uncomfortable to think about the kids, the system, the bureaucracy, what the parents of these kids are going through. That's the harder part. Much easier to think about those great foster parents. Talk to us about kind of the idealized process. What in theory, if everything was working well, and we know government often always works well, if everything was working well, what that process would be, and how does that contrast in reality? Because I think it gives a good sense of the gaps that you're coming to fill.
So the problem of abandonment, of abuse, severe neglect, this goes back to our founding. And in the old days, what would happen to you is you get taken in and then you get put on a train, an orphan train, and you get sent out west, and they would hope someone would take you in to work the farm. The laws were not ever written to protect a child who didn't have a parent who would or could protect them. And then, in our more recent history, it was, believe it or not, this is such a neat historical fact for those of us who are consider ourselves on the center right. But it was Ronald Reagan who established the first National Foster Care Month. And what he said at the time is still what is ideal today. And he said, the best setting for any child is to grow up within a family. That is the unit. That is the ideal. And when children are born into circumstances where they don't have that, but they have worse than that, right? They're being born into a meth house and they're left on the floor with needles and feces, or other situations where there's just outright monstrous, behavior. The children who go to bed in fear every night because of what's happening when that bedroom door closes. Um, when that happens, and those children have to be removed for their safety, we owe them a safe and loving environment, and to get them into that and out of foster care as quickly as possible. It's supposed to be just a temporary transition, right? Where you go from danger and to safety. And in an ideal world, your parent, it's mostly single moms. Your parent can remedy the situation. So if it's drugs, which is in most cases a situation, if they can get clean, that is ideal, and then you can go home and the community wraps themselves around you, and that's wonderful. And that happens in some situations. But in my 10 that I fostered, not a single one was ever able to go back into the home environment, because it was so incredibly dangerous. And so then the goal there is to find a relative, of course, or kin, or a coach, a teacher, someone who knows, loves you. Sometimes it's a nurse or the police officer who found you. And then finally, there are families like mine who just say, I don't know who you are, but I will love you for a day, a week, a year, or forever. And the goal is to get every child into a safe and loving home. And that's what Ronald Reagan identified as the need then. That is what is still the need now. And I think what is really unique about the Center for the Rights of Abused Children and our contribution to this is that we recognize that the problems that have been plaguing families and children in these situations for decades will not ever be remedied or ever be solved until we recognize the constitutional rights of these little ones. And so that's what we're doing. And there are situations where we need to strengthen some of the pillars for parents as well, parents who are wrongly accused, and we've done that work. But the vast majority are innocent children who get stuck in the system. Like one little boy I know was in there at age 3, and he went through 47 different homes until he was 17 years old. Um, and I'll tell you one thing quick, Peter, and then I'll let you ask some questions. But I don't even like the term foster child, because they're not they're children. They're boys and girls. They're your children. They're my children. Foster care is the place they go while they're waiting for someone to love them and keep them safe and help them heal. And so I want people to know um, that there is hope and there are solutions, and we are pushing them through furiously and fast and making a huge difference. And in 10 or 15 years, I think that we will have begun to end aging out. We can stop the vast majority of trafficking in the US. Most of those kids come from foster care, so we know where to put the reforms. And we can make this world a better place. We can extend the promise of the Constitution that we have fought so hard for adult rights over the lives and liberty interests of these little ones, right, who are caught between a rock and a hard place. A parent who's harmed them or doesn't have the capacity, the wherewithal to love them, and the state, which is no place for a child.
You open the door to tons of avenues. We're going to see how many of those we can go down. But I want to start actually. You mentioned you don't like the term foster care, and you look at your name, even your old name, Generation Justice, now Center for Rights of Abused Children. Foster care isn't in there yet. It's the center piece of what you're doing. A cynic might look at your name and say, well, rights of abused children, you're just assuming that every foster child coming through is abused. Have you no decency? Isn't that such a rude assumption that every kid who's in the system is being abused? Steel man that for me. Why that name?
So we are much bigger than foster care. Okay, we a lot of children who are abused never make it into safety. So, for instance, most sexual abuse and incest is never reported. So, our net is bigger, right? It's we want to protect. We believe every child has inherent worth, and that they have the right to not, um, to bodily integrity. That the same things you want for your children that I want for mine. And there are some monstrous things that happen in this world. There are some very ugly things that we don't want to see. But when you see a pregnant woman on the street corner who's shooting up, where do you think that child is going to end up? Um, that a lot of them will end up in the foster care system. Sometimes they can go to a relative, but often not, right? Often they're completely on their own. So I would say that some children who are abused make it into foster care, and sometimes it's true that children will end up in the system who don't belong there, because bureaucrats make terrible mistakes. And so, one of the reforms that we have pushed so far hard for is to make sure that every parent they call these dependency cases, every parent and every child has an attorney. Now, in 49 states, parents do have attorneys, and they're there to defend their rights, right? Because this is sacred, the right to parent, the right to the upbringing of your child. But most children do not. Most of these abuse victims do not. And that's the same if they're wrongly taken into the system, Peter. They don't have anyone to say, hey, my mom didn't do that. I need to go home. And so we are going state by state to ensure that when these most sacred and fundamental interests are on the line, that the constitutional protections are in place, and in this case, for due process. And then we also work on laws like if your concern is the narrative of sometimes the state walks in and takes a kid who's barefoot, right, who's just playing, if that's your narrative, then there are protections for that, and there are a lot of laws that we've helped pass, and that a number of groups have worked on that say this is not, this is just a freewheeling childhood. This does not constitute abuse or neglect, and we've made sure that parents have attorneys and that they have rights, so that if that happens, those kids pretty immediately go home. Um, the bigger problem, though, Peter, is the narrative that conservatives have never talked about. And it's one that I didn't know until I became a foster parent. Like most people, thought kids in foster care were juvenile delinquents. That is what the polls show. Most of us think they're delinquents. They are not. These are kids who have been severely abused. These are children who have had a sibling murdered, or two, and the rest of the siblings end up in the system. 9 of my 10 children that I took in were born drug exposed. And I'm talking meth, heroin, multiple cocktails, almost not making it out of NICU, the newborn intensive care unit, and one went home and died. So the bigger I don't want to say the bigger problem. Both are problems, right? When bureaucrats get it wrong. But the problem that is largely unaddressed right now are the lives of these innocent children who suffer repeated abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, who are starving, and who are often left in these situations and never rescued. There was a girl, I mean, this happens all the time, and the American Enterprise Institute has done a tremendous job documenting these child fatalities of children known to authorities. About 80% of kids who die every year, they're known to authorities who have failed to bring them to safety. So we had a girl in our backyard here. She was in the system from zero, from when she was born to the age of 10, in and out, in and out, in and out, and eventually was murdered at the age of 10,
Mm.
toenails pulled out. I mean, I'm not going to get into the graphics, just horrific violence. 20 calls had gone in to the local child protection agency, and they had not brought her to safety. And these were calls from teachers, principals. These were not like the ex-husband calling. So more often than not, the problem is that we are notifying government about these horrible situations where kids desperately need rescue from this, from trafficking and more, and we're not bringing them in to safety. And that needs to be remedied. I mean,
Is
if
that
we
just an
believe
over I mean, is the system just too underwater with cases or not enough people going into this or
part of it's a lot of things. Part of it is uh, part of it is Supreme Court precedent that has been set in ways that discourage agencies from taking any action whatsoever. Um, part of it part of it is this narrative that has sort of swung too far, which is people think we take too many children, and it's I've heard this so many times, and I've heard it from conservatives. It's just neglect. It's just neglect. So if we just wrap, the church community around these families, everything will be fine. It's almost all okay. That is not true. That is just such a false narrative, and it's super destructive. Most children, most of these neglect cases are kids who are born into serious drug abuse situations to a single mom on drugs whose first love is the drug, who can barely walk on the street, let alone take care of a newborn baby. Okay? That is the reality. And in 99, this is a statistic, not hyperbole. In 99% of neglect cases, there's more going on than poverty. Okay. And that makes sense because agencies don't want to just take kids in because they're poor, because there are millions of poor children across the United States. They really only want to get involved if they think they absolutely have to. They absolutely cannot fix this situation. And that's what federal law says. You don't get to just remove a child on a hunch. I mean, you have to have real reasons, and you should have to have real reasons to remove a child. But there is too often, half of the children who are removed uh, into foster care, they will go home and be re-abused and re-enter foster care. So the reality is we're not keeping children safe. We're not keeping children alive. So that is something that I think I had no idea. And I think that's true for the most part for most people. I assumed children who were abused to death were locked in closets and no one knew about them and that we couldn't do anything about it. But now I know the government does know. And so we're going to make government do something about it. We're going to hold them accountable for these young lives when they do nothing.
all right, so let's talk about some of the things you're doing because I think all the listeners need a break from the horrors. But you are
Sorry.
changing
I'm
things.
sorry. I am
No, no,
happy.
no, because
You know,
there's more things I could talk about of the terrible things that are out there. But let's at least pause for a second because you guys are making real change. I mean, reading some of the things and preparing for this and just watching your work over the years, like it's just so surprising how these kids really are treated as second class citizens. And I use citizen very deliberately, right? I mean, the Constitution protects every soul in the country. But we also have this paradigm in our minds of, well, children don't have the agency to make their decisions. And so that's why you can understand how good intentions would lead them to not have a lawyer because what they're kids, we're going to take care of them. And yet they're also citizens, they're also people. So talk to us about some of the ID changes that you've done, the legal representation, some of these wins you've done to help these kids actually be able to have a voice in the system.
Sure. And, I just, on the constitutional point, I just want to, be clear about this, that children have the same constitutional rights that we do, right? They are they're people, they're God's children. They have the same worth, Peter, that you do and that I do. Now, they may have a diminished capacity to exercise those rights, and there are good reasons, right, for that. But they still have the rights to life, right? To not be hurt in some of the horrible ways, um, some of the monstrous things that do happen. Look, we're not advocating for kids to emancipate when they're 9 years old or anything crazy like that. We're talking about life interests here, and real safety issues. So one thing that I love to share with people is there is a general public awareness about the dangers, and the escalating, um, child sex trafficking in our country. And what most people do not know is that about 85% of the kids who are trafficked in our country come through the foster care system. And what that means is when we know who they are, we can build protections and laws and reforms around them to keep them safe. And I'll tell you why. Because trafficking is a billion-dollar industry. These traffickers want money. And Peter, they're not going to go after my children because I'm going to look for my children and there's going to be a search and my whole community is going to look for my children. When you are in foster care, no one looks for you. And it was only 10 years ago that federal law even required the states to report if you went missing. They didn't even have to report that to anyone, to NCMEC, to anybody. And traffickers knew this. There's congressional testimony about it. And so they prey on these children, right? They either steal them outside of group homes, or sometimes they lure them away with promises of presence and love and money and things like that, right? For children who have never had any of those things. So we have been building up reforms to protect these children. One of them is, we passed some laws in Arizona, also Missouri, and other states where it is mandatory now. If a child goes missing from the foster care system, police must be notified and they must search until the child comes home. Uh, in some states, the police said to us, the barrier for us searching in our state, we get notified, but we don't have pictures. Why? Because no one is taking pictures of these teens because they don't have moms and dads. Okay. So they don't have pictures and the police couldn't search. So we said to give these kids free IDs. We did that. And now if they go missing, literally the police can press a button. They see the picture, it's uploaded in the system, and everybody, like an Amber Alert, can be on it and help find these kids and bring them home. So these are the things that make a real difference, in the lives of these children. And if we protect the kids in foster care, we can almost eliminate child sex trafficking in the United States. And I think that's something we can all come together on. We may not agree on, the extent of what constitutes abuse or when exactly you should step in, and that's okay. That's okay. Those are very nuanced conversations. But we all agree that when a kid is taken in one of these situations and they cannot go home and they're in the system, we need to protect them. And the best protection is a family. And short of a family, we need to make sure the laws are there to protect them if they do go missing or the traffickers come. And I'll tell you, you're probably going, how is this even possible that no one went looking for them? And I will tell you how. It's because government would classify these children as runaways, and then they would wash their hands of them and nobody
Mm.
would search. And some kids do run, okay, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't go get them. They're 13 years old and they still need a mom and dad and safety. But also who are 2 and 3 years old don't run. And agencies need to be accountable for these children, and we need to search and make sure every child comes first, prevent them from going missing, but second, search and bring every single one of them home safely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the statistic did you say this number? 20,000 children disappear from foster care every year. I mean, that's a lot of
Yes,
kids. And yeah, my assumption probably would be, oh, a lot of them do run away, and then you go and say something like 3-year-olds don't run. That's true. 3-year-olds
but
don't run
but
away.
Peter, also, I have a 14-year-old. If she runs away, should I just be like, "Ah, she ran away, well, good
Right.
luck?" No, the state is in loco parentis, right? The state at that point has a responsibility to protect the life of that child. And if you are pro life, if you believe in the dignity and worth of every human being, then the state has an obligation to go find that child and make sure they are fine. And a 17-year-old is still a child. And any mother is going to tell you that. And especially these children, children who haven't been parented, children who have been drug exposed at birth, whose brains are different because of that, right? They take longer to develop, they lack a lot of executive function. These children need protection and they need it immediately. So, whether they ran or not, I don't care if they ran, they're coming home and we're going to search for them and we're going to help them be safe. They do not belong to be in the arms of a predator who's going to make them turn 20 tricks a night.
Talk to us about the legal side of it. I mean, it's almost like you have this a whole pro bono law firm built into what you're doing. I mean, talk to us about that work, and is that are you doing that across the country? Are you mostly in Arizona or certain states, or are
You
there
bet.
still
So, we're
laws
not,
preventing
so,
people from having lawyers?
so one of the things we were talking about reunification, and people worried that if kids had attorneys, would that mean like they're going to be like, "Ah, my mom hurt me," because I didn't get my Christmas present or whatever. So the studies have shown there are states where children and parents do have attorneys in these proceedings, in these legal proceedings. And what the research shows is that these children are reunified safely at the same rate. So same it doesn't wreck reunification by any stretch. And they get out of the system 3 times faster than children who don't have attorneys. And that makes sense because the attorney's like, hey, there's a timeline here. Hey, judge, like, let's keep going. Let's keep going. They're also more likely to be able to stay with siblings. Relatives are found more often. All of the outcomes that we would hope, and that is so important. Can you imagine, Peter, going into a courtroom and everyone else in the courtroom has an attorney. The agencies have attorneys, the parents have attorneys, the judge even has a guardian ad litem to tell him kind of what to do and what's going on. And the child victim is sitting there, 12 years old, with no one. Okay. And picture an incest situation, which unfortunately happens more often than we like to think. And there is nobody for you, nobody to put your rights to safety before the judge. You cannot have due process. You cannot have adversarial court proceedings. You cannot have justice with that kind of imbalance. Rights are only as good as enforcement. And if no one is going to enforce your rights to life or to safety, you are out of luck. And that's what these outcomes show for these kids. That's why kids age out of the system. So when you ask about our pro bono attorneys, we we have, yes, we have a national legal network of attorneys who will help children in the most devastating situations. We've helped children in Florida. We had 2 teenagers, their parents both dead. They were put into separate group homes, and they wanted to live with their biological grandmother, and the judge didn't like the grandmother and so was refusing it. So we fought on behalf of these children and the grandmother to get them reunited and to get these kids out of these group homes. So I don't want you to think we don't help bio families. We do. We want bio families too when they are safe. We just want to be honest about safety. And are you talking about reunifying with a pedophile? Or are you talking about reunifying with somebody who had a drug problem and is getting clean? Those are totally different circumstances. So we do have those attorneys available. And then we're also changing the laws state by state to give more of these children attorneys in their cases. Um, We've passed bills of rights that protect parents and their rights in these proceedings in the states, as well as the children's due process rights in these proceedings. Look, the Constitution is awesome. And when you give parents and children due process and you protect their rights against an overreaching government or a bureaucratic government, the outcomes are better for everyone. And we believe that children have a constitutional right to attorneys just like the criminally accused do, because their lives and liberty interests are, hang in the balance of these decisions. But until we have that Supreme Court ruling, we'll be working to make this policy state by state.
That's amazing, amazing stuff. I mean, in theory, I guess these attorneys for the kids should be in partnership often with the state, right? I mean, you gave that example where it sounds like the state may have not been in favor of what the family actually wanted, but and the kids actually wanted. But in theory, that gives kind of double the arsenal for litigation on this kid side, the state side, against
Well,
whoever.
or the parent side. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing. So,
Mm, mm.
we like I said, we have helped. Like we had a mother whose children were wrongly removed, and that situation was brought to us, and we helped her. And in that situation, there was an attorney for her, uh, but who wasn't doing a really great job, right? And that can happen. And so we stepped in there. So sometimes we're stepping in for grandma. Sometimes we're stepping in for mom. We had a situation where a sister discovered that her sister was trafficking the daughter. This happens a lot for drugs. Okay. Most trafficking, believe it or not, is done within families. Okay. And so this sister came to us and said, how do I keep, my niece safe? And eventually we helped this, you know, mom could not get clean. And so we helped the aunt adopt the child. So, we're our goal is to see every child safe and loved, and the first thing is biological parents, and then biological family and kin and places like that, obviously. But sometimes the families, are not there for them. I mean, Peter, I'll tell you a story that blew my mind. I could not believe this, and it took me really, honestly, years to understand what had happened. I was called in for one of my babies, for a beautiful baby girl, and who was healthy. And this was very unusual. And so I asked the social worker. I said, "This is a really healthy baby. Like, what's happening in this situation?" And they said, "Well, the baby's mom was 12 years old." And I said, "Oh, okay, so like young." Can't Probably doesn't, wants to go to middle school. And I said, "So are we just waiting for like for mom, the grandma, to get her house ready to bring the baby home?" And she said, "Grandma is the reason that the 12-year-old
Ugh,
is pregnant." Okay. Um, Grandma was getting money and drugs and her rent paid, and in exchange was, you know, trading her daughter. And at the time, I was like, "What?" I was so confused. I almost couldn't get it. Now I get it. Now I've read the statistics. I was so concerned about the baby girl, and really I wish I had rescued both, right? I wish I
yeah,
had fought for both. And I just So this happens all the time. And like I said, most trafficking does take place within families, and most of this stuff is tied back to drug use. It is not a poverty problem. There are millions of kids growing up in poverty whose parents love them and will do anything for them. This is largely a drug problem, and when you are on these kinds of drugs, things are not right in your head. And anyone, if you ever meet anybody who's recovered from a serious addiction, whether that's alcohol or drugs, they will tell you that their first love is the drug, and that they are not in a position to to do what's best, especially in the cases of the infants where we have the highest mortality rates.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is such a nexus of so many issues that you've identified here, right? And so it means we're always going to have a need for a foster care system. We're always going to have kids who are abused in different ways, as much as we would like to prevent it. But to kind of wrap us up here, how do you judge success over the next 5, 10 years? How do you actually know that you're moving the needle to not the perfect system? We're never gonna get the perfect system, but a far, far better system. I think you mentioned one of those metrics of getting to a point where nobody ages out of the foster care system, which I think is a beautiful goal. But talk to us about some of those goals and how you get there.
Sure. Well, one input is due process, right? This is a system that operates in the dark. And that's true for the parents, it's true for the kids, it's true for for the aunts, uncles. So there's no transparency. So getting attorneys into that system, making there be more accountability within that system, all of that has to be cleaned up in the way that you would for any other government area. Um, on the output side, what we would like to see is no more kids aging out. So when you come into this system, you either get to go home pretty quickly, you go to a relative or you get a new family, but you don't spend your entire childhood moving from home to home like the child I told you about, who went in 47 homes over the course of 13 years. I mean, just devastating. No more aging out. In a country with millions of wonderful families, there are homes for those 20,000 kids. I'm telling you, if people knew, they would take them in a heartbeat. A lot of this is information. So I think we can end aging out so almost every child can have a safe and loving home. Two, I think we can end most domestic trafficking. We know it's within families, we know it's drugs, and we know they're coming up through foster care. So there are multiple reforms to get into place to protect those kids. And then I want to say this: prevention is really important. And I want to talk honestly as we wrap up about what real prevention, upstream prevention looks like for kids, because these are things nobody wants to say. Okay. One, we got to stop the drugs. You've got to stop the drugs. I am for any drug treatment, any pregnant woman who wants to go in and get treated to get off those drugs, open the doors for her, let that baby be born healthy with a normal brain, give her a chance to raise that baby. That is the number one driver of kids in the system. So, not using drugs and making sure that pregnant women have a chance to get off the drugs while they're pregnant is really, really critical. The things we've always said, get married, right? That's still important. Most of these children, there are no fathers in the picture or they can't be identified. So, also, that is very important. And then the third thing I would say is that we talk about having communities around people. And this is so important because most children who are abused and abandoned, they never have to even go into foster care because their grandmother, their aunt, or uncle, someone's got their eye on them and steps in and says, "Hey, let me help here." And so it is really critical that if you see something, you say something, and that we wrap our arms around people with with these really severe challenges. And the other one, of course, is mental health. That's a number of these other situations. So we all know if you've had someone with mental health issues in your family, how hard those are to treat. And I would just say, don't give up, because healthy mothers and healthy fathers have healthy children. And at the end of the day, that's what we all want.
Well, Darcy, the work you and your team, which I know is a great team, you have some real talented people working for you and working with you in this fight. It's just phenomenal. It's remarkable. It's not something that I think we as conservatives, libertarians, free marketers probably think about enough. But I could put my wonky hat on. I'm sure you could too, and make the case of like, why doing all this is so important to those kind of free market aims we want, reducing government, reducing, uh, and, I mean, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's all baked into everything you're doing, and so it's remarkable work. It's hard work. I'm sure there are very tiring and hard days, but thank you for doing it, and thank you for your whole team, and keep up
Thanks,
the fight.
Peter. I appreciate it. It is a privilege to fight for these kiddos, um, and we're really appreciative to you and to all of the supporters who've made it possible to rescue and help so many. And we've helped over 1 million children, and that's a good beginning. So thank you, and I hope you have me on maybe for episode 200.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thanks, Peter.
Before we started recording, I told Darcy that I really like my job that gets to be an inch deep and a mile wide on a lot of things. And I don't have to spend all of my days in such complicated, often heartbreaking issues like she does. But thank goodness that she and her team are there at the Center for Rights for Abused Children because they are doing stellar work, really important work, hard work. And as we heard in the conversation, it is a remarkably complex web of issues that are affecting these kids that we look at and say, oh, those are foster kids. But she even made the point this is about more than foster kids. They are kids and they are America's children. They are a rising generation. They are the ones that we will count on to keep this American experiment going. And we need them to be safe. We need them to be secure. We need them to be educated, healthy. And that is the work that they're doing. It is terrific to see the center making these leverage structural changes that impact hundreds of kids, thousands of kids, millions of kids in a go, but also this one-on-one work, right? The litigation work that's helping that single individual. And it's a really unique organization that is able to do both of those things. So many policy organizations are just focused on the mass change, and that's really important. And so many point of service organizations are just worried on the one human right in front of them. And I think what Darcy has built to be able to do both is really phenomenal. That one of the great things about working at Donors Trust is we get to work with donors who care about that full web. Some working at point of service, some working in policy, some working across the board, trying to change and drive change at every level, which is just truly remarkable ways of using their philanthropy. If that sounds like you, if you want to be strategic with your philanthropy and really make an impact with the giving that you do already or that you hope to ramp up, then we would love to talk to you at Donors Trust and have a conversation about how we can be helpful with our donor advised funds and other consulting work that we do. Give us a call, go to donorstrust.org and poke around there, kick the tires, reach out to us. We would love to talk. As always, thank you for being a giver. We'll be back soon with another new episode. And until then, we'll talk more soon.